Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about finding peace. Now, this is something we all want and we all strive for. But for some reason, many of us never seem to find peace. Now, for many people who don't look like they came out of a Norman Rockwell painting, being marginalized has become a way of life. It's just something we lived with. We look different. We talk different. We eat different foods. As our families came to America, we discovered something called de facto segregation. This is where we all lived in the same area because we wanted to be with people that were from the same place we were, that had the same culture, that spoke the same language. Then these parts of the city started getting labeled. It was the Puerto Rican section, or the Hispanic section, or the Cuban section, or whatever section you happen to be in. We tended to stay in that area for church, for school, for social engagements, for shopping, and basically we were expected to live our life in this little pocket where we migrated to, and that was the way it was going to be. Now, since the majority of Latin immigrants tend to be Catholic, we get to have an added measure of guilt, both religious guilt and family guilt. Now, if you're a young girl, that guilt is exponentially greater, almost to the point where it controls your life well into your adulthood. The challenge now is, how do you find peace in life coming from this environment? We're going to talk about that today. My name's Frank Zaccari. This is Life Altering Events. This is Near-Death Experiences. My guest today is my friend, Maribel Cardez, whose family came from Puerto Rico and settled in Brooklyn because that was the rule. You had to go to Brooklyn, where she and her siblings were expected to spend the rest of their life. Now, Maribel wanted more. Let's get right into her story. Maribel, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Frank, thank you so much for having me on your program. I'm really excited to be here and more excited to share some of this story. And I love the way you've teed this up because it's the truth. It's what happens. We move into certain neighborhoods because that's pretty much what's expected. And so my parents are from Puerto Rico. They married very young, and I am child number 4 of 5 children. They did move to Brooklyn, where I was born and raised, in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, in fact. And, you know, as a Puerto Rican family and Spanish and, you know, Latin, I guess, if you will, and Catholic, right, at the time, because I know we went through a couple of different, you know, religions, but Catholic really is what it was at the time for us. And so, you know, you do grow up with guilt and you have certain expectations. And one of those expectations is that the daughters never move out of the house until they're married, right? That's what's expected. And so, you know, for me, it was a little bit different. I wanted a little bit more, like you said, Frank. And so I went to elementary school in Brooklyn. And when it was time to go to junior high school, I had to take the subway 2 stops to go to school. And my parents, when I was 12 years old, my parents said, no, we're not having that. Right.
I'm sure they're panicking.
Of course. So the next best thing was there was a Catholic school like 2.5 blocks away from the house that we lived in. And that's where I went for 7th grade. And I absolutely hated it, I got to say. It wasn't what I wanted to do. But I was able to then leave there and for 8th and 9th grade, go to the traditional junior high school in the neighborhood that was about 7 blocks away from the home. And my next step was high school. Where would I go to high school? That's when I said, I'm not staying in the neighborhood high school, and had the opportunity to go to school in Manhattan on Park Avenue and 33rd Street.
Wow, nice area.
Yeah, beautiful area. And it felt like a really big deal for me because, you know, the excitement was you got to, I grew up on a nice block. I just want to make sure I mentioned that because it was a dead end. So we got to play on the street safely, right? There wasn't a lot of traffic and we had a lot of different families, but even on that block, you saw what you described because we had, you know, the Black families, we had the Hispanic, mostly Puerto Rican families, and we also had white American families still living there. There were more elderly folks that lived towards the end of the block, but it was still segregated even on one block, which is really amazing. But At any rate, the excitement was getting to walk across the big street, going to the corner bodega, if you will, right?
Right.
Just to bring a little Latin flair into the conversation. I got to go to high school, Park Avenue and 33rd Street. That was a really big deal for me, taking the subway into the city every day. And I got to see that, wow, there's more to life than just Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, it's incredible. You told me when you went to high school, you're all excited, and there's these course of studies. Now, how did that work?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So while we were, in junior high school, as you're looking to see which high school you're going to go to, you either go to your neighborhood high school, or if you want to follow a certain track, you now have to apply and get accepted for a different school. So some of my girlfriends in school they were applying to this school, Norman Thomas High School. And the track then was that girls went and studied secretarial studies. Well, I didn't know better, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I probably would never have gone down that track. But it was exciting because I got to apply to that school. I was accepted. They had, I think what I heard was close to 2,000 applications for 500 openings.
Wow.
So I was really excited to have been one of those that got selected. I did really well in junior high school and had great grades. And so I think that also helped me get in, passing an entrance exam and the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, the school doesn't exist anymore today, but I still get excited when I'm watching TV programs and you can see the New York City skyline and the building still stands above the skyline, so you can see it. And I take pride in that school. It had 2 tracks. It was either secretarial studies or a marketing program. Now, eventually in my career, I did end up in marketing, which is why I'm saying I wish I'd known more or known better. I would have probably taken the marketing route back then. But the school was 90% women or girls and 10% boys. And so clearly most of the secretarial studies was made up of female, and the guys did the marketing side.
Marketing stuff.
And there were some guys that did do the secretarial studies as well. But, the good thing about it was that we learned a skill that we were able to put to work right away. You learned shorthand that we don't really use today.
Correct.
We learned typing skills, and they had a program that you can get a job after school. So I did work for an attorney after school as an assistant in the office. So that was great because I got a taste of what the business world was like early in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was exciting for me. But it put me down the path of, well, that's what you're going to do for a living now, is be a secretary. And even still wanted more than that. After high school, of course, the natural course is that you go to college.
Right.
I got a taste of working. And in fact, I'd met a recruiter and he introduced me to a role at a bank, and I got the job. But I was only 17 years old because I had graduated when I was 17. And I had to wait until the day after I turned 18 to actually start working there. And that was exciting for me. Yes, it was a secretarial role because it's what I learned to do, but it really got my foot in the door to corporate America. And I worked in the international private banking division. And this is where I started my banking career. And that was exciting because it gave me a taste of, again, there's still even more. First, it was that little block in Brooklyn. Then it was going to high school in Manhattan. But now I'm working for a bank at Citicorp Center, another building that stands above the skyline in New York. But I got to see that there was more. I was meeting people from Switzerland, people from London, from Japan. There was so much travel going on back and forth. Not that I got to do any traveling as an assistant, as a secretary, but it gave me a taste for, again, more. And I always knew I wanted more. And that, I'm still suffering from that even today, the desire for more.
Mm-hmm.
But
now you have the job. It's in New York. And instead of taking these multiple subways there, you decide, I'm going to live there. How did that go over at home?
Well, funny thing is that even back then, you still couldn't afford to live in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. But because I got a taste of working and I'm earning a little bit of money, I delayed going to college. So I took that 1 year off, the year that we all said
right.
Else. Mine turned into 20 years, but I'll go into that a little bit later. A year after working, I decided that you know what, it's time for me to move out on my own. Of course, that's a very difficult thing to tell your parents, being a girl, being a, Puerto Rican girl, unmarried. You don't leave home unless you're
You're
married.
married, correct?
I have three older brothers, just to set the stage. I have three older brothers and one younger sister. And my three older brothers, each one of them, when they got married, they each came back to live in my parents' house, even if it was for a few months, they still did that. So the thought that their 19-year-old daughter was moving out, and in fact, I was 18 when I made my announcement and moved out a month after I turned 19. Well, needless to say, Mom was really upset about it.
Yeah.
Mom was super upset. She didn't even want to talk to me for about a month, and I had to deal with that, and I was accepting of it. I think, to a certain extent, I was the black sheep of the family. I did a lot of good things along the way, but
Right.
We grow up and we learn as we grow.
You're breaking the tradition. It's almost like the movie, the Fiddler on the Roof. Someone has to break it, and that one takes the wrath of everything. But then it's okay for everybody else after.
It's funny because my sister and I, we tease each other about that because she's 2.5 years younger than I am. And I always say that I'm chopping down the trees for her so that as she's coming behind me, things are a little clearer and easier for her. Whether they were or weren't, I don't know. I mean, we had a great upbringing. My parents are probably the two best people in the world, quite honestly.
Right.
Very strict, but they also came from a strict upbringing as well. So it really wasn't any different, except that, now they're the parents and now they get to say what you're going to do and not do. But
Right.
so I did end up moving out, and I stayed out for a number of years. And I did find myself having to move back home at one point.
Mhm.
And I think I was about 23 years old at the time when I moved back into their home on a temporary basis.
Right. That happens quite a bit. Now, when we talked, you were telling me 1987 or thereabout, you had this medical emergency and it almost took your life. What happened?
I did, and what I'd like to do, Frank, I want to come back to that in just a moment. I want to share something that happened actually 2 years later that I will bring the story back in. So I appreciate you asking, and I've got that placeholder in mind. After living in New York, and I not only did I work at Citicorp Center, I also went to work at Dean Witter at the World Trade Center, and I did that for 2 years before moving to South Florida. And I moved to Miami, and I was here just a couple of months, and I got into this massive car accident that I recently wrote about it because I had a recent panic attack that brought back that car accident to me in a really bizarre way. And I hesitate only because sometimes it's still difficult to share this story, believe it or not. The car accident, I had just moved into an apartment and we were driving to the apartment when this young man took the red light and hit our car, and we ended up actually going into a body of water. It was a pond in a residential neighborhood, but it was about 12 to 15 feet deep.
Wow.
And when that crash occurred, I was knocked unconscious. So I was spared the angst, I guess, if you will, of what the other two passengers in the car went through. And one of them was my girlfriend who was driving the car, and my son, who was only 2 years old, sitting in the back seat. When the accident occurred, our heads collided. I hit the dashboard. I got knocked unconscious. Her face broke the windshield, not the windshield, the driver's side window. When the car went into the water, it allowed the car to start filling with water rapidly. And fortunately, she had the thought, I guess, popped into her head that she needed to get him out of the car somehow, out of his car seat. So she pushed the release button, and the thing that holds him in place. The car seat.
Back in those days, they rode up, right?
Exactly. They would go up, as opposed to now that they're just like all these belts that just tied them up. That would be really challenging today. But anyway, she was able to get him out and there was a pocket of air still remaining in the car. It hadn't filled completely. And when she looked, someone had jumped into the water, and she was able to push him through and give him to whoever was in the water, and they swam up with him. And she pulled me up, and I had, there was blood, and I wasn't breathing. So she thought I was dead. And at that point, she held her breath as long as she could, needed to get out herself, got herself out of the vehicle, and swam up. She couldn't feel from her waist down because she'd broken several bones as well in the accident. I say as well, but quite honestly, she's the one who suffered most of the injuries, outside of my being knocked unconscious. But she was able to alert people that were there that there was still somebody down in the water. This happened on a Saturday midday in Miami. Somebody jumped in and they were able to get me out of the car. I don't know how it happened. I guess the things neutralize at some point and maybe you're able to open the door. I still have no idea how they got me out, but they got me out. I know that as far as I'm concerned, I woke up in the fire rescue on the way to the hospital. And the paramedics told me that I'd been alert for a little bit of time, a matter of minutes. Once they got me out of the water, they were able to resuscitate me, and they were asking me questions, and I couldn't remember. I wasn't sure of the date at first, but then things started to come back to me, date, my name, and things like that. But it was still a little iffy that I ended up spending an entire week in the hospital because of that car accident. And that, I guess, is what you would call a near-death experience.
Yeah, that's pretty close, yes.
And I joke sometimes about the fact that I might have been a cat in a previous life because, they say cats have 9 lives. And I think I've cashed in a couple chips already, but I still have life left in me. I know I do. The reason I wanted to hold off on the one that you mentioned is because I have my son, who he was 2 years old at the time of this car accident. But my son came into my life in June of 1988. The incident that you're making reference to occurred in October of 1987. And I actually suffered an ectopic pregnancy. And I didn't know that I was pregnant at the time. I remember it happened on a Friday night. The it that I'm talking about is the moment where I probably should have rushed to the hospital, but didn't because I really wasn't sure what was happening. So I spent Friday, Saturday, Sunday until Monday morning. This is a period where I had moved back to my parents' house. Remember, we talked a little bit about Hispanic families, the whole 9 yards. How do you tell your parents that this is going on? You don't. But my dad, nevertheless, drove me to the hospital. And I wanted to go to Manhattan. We were living in Brooklyn, in the same house that I grew up in. I got to move back into that same house. And he drove me to Manhattan, to Beth Israel Hospital on 15th Street and First Avenue, which wasn't around the corner. I think it was a good 30-minute drive from home. And he left me because he had to go to work. And he worked another 20, 30 minutes the opposite direction of our home. So this was really out of his way. So he dropped me off. I went in, they examined me, and that's when they gave me the news that I was pregnant. And because it was at the point that it was, that Friday night that I'm making reference to, I felt something burst. I needed like a little pop sound, but I wasn't sure what was going on. And I was in a lot of pain, but I was kind of ignoring it, thinking it was just going to pass and go away. It just got worse and worse and worse. But I never really told my parents to what extent I was in pain and how badly I was feeling. When the doctors told me what was going on, I didn't have a decision to make. There was no pregnancy to save.
Correct.
It was just
now they got to save your life.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what they told me.
Now, Maribel, you had said, you explained the accident, which had to be just terrifying. And then you wanted to step back to 2 years ago when we asked that question. So let's go back there.
Well, yeah, I wanted to put a pin in that one because it's interesting how things happen in life that end up being interconnected in some way. And in 1987, I did suffer a medical emergency. And interestingly enough, I ended up moving back to my parents' house, and they were still living in the same house that we grew up in. So I wasn't feeling well for a little bit. And it was a Friday night when I felt a lot of pain and this, I heard this popping sound, wasn't sure what it was, but I dealt with it over the weekend, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, I asked my dad if he would take me to the hospital. I wanted to go to Manhattan to Beth Israel Hospital, which is, maybe 30 minutes in one direction of our home. And he still had to go to work. So he drove me to the hospital, dropped me off, and then headed to work, which was another 25, 30 minutes in the opposite direction. So, you think about the things that your parents do for you, and,
right.
You're consumed by guilt already because you think that you know what's going on, but you're not sure, but you're not really sharing what's happening with them. When I get to the hospital, they go through all the examinations that they do at the hospital, all these different tests, and then they come in and share with me what's happening. And at that point, they said, "We realize you're here alone, so you might want to call someone to come into the hospital because you need to undergo emergency surgery." I'm like, what's happening? This is when they explained to me that I had suffered an ectopic pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about ectopic pregnancies, and apparently that rupture sound and feeling that I experienced on Friday night was my fallopian tube rupturing.
Right.
And what they said to me was that you have to go into emergency surgery because any longer, within 24 hours, you could potentially die from this. So now I figured, okay, I've got to call my parents. So I called both my parents and let them know that I'm in the hospital. There's an emergency. I'm going to have surgery. You both need to come in. My dad now left work again, picked up mom, went to the hospital. Because I was 23 years old, I asked the doctors to not disclose anything to them. Let me be the one to share it with them. But out of guilt, I never shared the story with them. I told them it was something else and not what was going on. And I have a daily reminder of it. I spent 7 days in the hospital, and in fact, I to get somewhat descriptive of it, I actually have a perpendicular scar as a result of it. I woke up to 44 staples, and it's like, to explain to them what happened, there weren't words. I just couldn't do it because of the guilt and because of everything I was feeling. And so I could have lost my life, interestingly enough, and yet I didn't. So this is why I'm saying that I might have been a cat in a previous life, and I know I've cashed in a few chips, and there's probably still some more out there for me.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I asked to put a pin in that is because this baby would have been born in June of 1988. Mm-hmm. June of 1988 is when my son came into my life, and my son came into my life through a relationship that I was involved in, a relationship that actually lasted for 25 years. Wow. So we raised a child together as our son, and he is my son, and no one can tell me otherwise, and no one can tell him otherwise either, because I have been mom for as long as he's known, and I still am. He stayed home until he was 26. Mm-hmm. So he was definitely with me for a very long time. In fact, he lives in San Diego. So
really? Not far from me.
He and his wife and their 3 children are now living in San Diego, which is absolutely wonderful. Gave me a place to go visit. But I bring that into the mix because my baby, like I said, would have been born in June of 1988. And what are the odds? What are the chances that I didn't have mine, but I say that God still gave me the opportunity to be a mother. Yes. And brought this child into my life. And, Laura, who I believe you know as well, defined it as divine choreography, which to me, it's like, wow, what a beautiful and poetic way of describing it, as Laura knows how to poetically say things, right?
Yes, she does.
So, yeah, that was an incredible situation that I had to endure. And to this day, I've yet to tell my parents. And I think I probably will be letting them know before this recording actually hits the air, because, someone will see it and someone will share it with them. And I'd rather it be me. And It's funny. I'm 58 years old and I'm still sitting here feeling a little squirmish about the idea of, I know I'm going to probably disappoint them in some way, but it's, we were talking about peace. Isn't that how we started this?
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm looking for peace and I'm finding peace, and I'm not hurting anyone by sharing the things that I'm sharing. And I think that, I think it's important that especially with an ectopic pregnancy, if women are not being informed of the possibilities of ectopic pregnancies, they really should be. Because quite honestly, I don't know that I've seen much about ectopic pregnancies. I learned about them after the fact, just via research, but it's not like it's been brought to my attention.
Correct. It's something that's not talked about. My ex-wife, the mother of my children, had one. So we learned, I was a medic in the military, so I knew that such a thing existed, but I had never seen one before. And they're rare, but they scare the hell out of you.
Incredible.
They're incredible. So now let's go forward again. You had the accident. A lot of things occurred. You can't go to work because you've been hurt, you're missing your time. And there's more to this story. So 2 years post-accident, you told me you had a meeting. What happened in this meeting?
Again, the way things become so interconnected, I'm still amazed that this actually happened. I was looking for a job and I met a recruiter and I needed to go meet the recruiter in her office. And it was like 7 p.m. one night, and there was a gap in my resume, right? And I wasn't going to cover the gap because I can explain why there was a gap. I had suffered this massive car accident that kept me out of work for almost a month, right? So I shared the story with her. And as I'm sharing the story with her, she started to tell me bits and pieces of it. And I said, wow, I know it made the news because that same week that I spent in the hospital, Channel 10 News here in South Florida did a segment on vehicles falling into the water, into canals, and how to best save yourself. So they had all these different techniques they were talking about. And it was my car that they would show being pulled out of the water. So that was kind of weird. But it prompted me while I was in the hospital, when I saw that, to call Channel 10 and see if they can give us the names of anyone that was involved in helping getting us out of the water. And they gave us the name of one person. And while this is still October well, maybe it's November of 89 now at this point, that we actually got to call one of the people that helped save our lives while we were still in the hospital. And that was a beautiful thing.
Yes.
But as you said, fast forward, it's now 1991. It's 2 years later. My son is now 4 years old. And I meet this recruiter, and she's familiar with the story of the car accident. And she said to me, you're not going to believe this. She said, I've got to call my assistant. My assistant's husband helped pull a little boy out of a body of water from a car accident around that same time. What are the chances that this could be related, that this could be the same accident? And so I said, if that's really true, and if it's them, I need to talk to him. He's the missing link as far as the other person who jumped in to save my son. And she called her assistant, and they got to talk about it. And sure enough, it was the same day. It was our car accident. When I went home that night, because it was pre-cell phone time, right?
Right.
So I got home, and my son is now 4 years old. And of course, now, he can speak pretty fluently at that point. And I said, you're not going to believe this. I met someone, and I didn't meet him, but I met someone who's connected to someone who helped save your life. We have to call him. And we got to call him, and we all cried together, What are the chances, Frank, that something like that can happen? And so to me, there's, when you think about how these things play out in life, I end up with a child at the same time that I was supposed to end up with a child.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And get into this massive accident, and I meet someone years later who also was connected, because that's who helped save his life. I mean, what are the chances of stuff like that happening?
Everything comes full circle. As a friend of ours says all the time, there are no random acts. And so all these things occurred for obviously a reason. So you have this epiphany, and you get some closure with the accident, and you talk to these people, and life seemed to be going along pretty well, right? And then 2013 comes along, and something happened again.
You know, interestingly enough, life was going well, and I've had a pretty good career, I must say, because although I started my life in that secretarial world, I certainly didn't stay there, right? We've already made reference a couple of times that Maribel wanted more. Maribel always wanted more, and I definitely went for more. And I'll tell you, I took that 1 year off of high school, and it wasn't a year, it turned into 20 years, but I did go back to school.
Back to school.
Bachelor's degree, and 10 years later I went back to school again to get my master's degree. But it was the end of 2012 that my position at this one bank was eliminated after 12 years of being there. And it was towards the tail end of the financial crisis in this country, right? But it was still kind of challenging to find employment, to find work. And you know, I say my life sounds like a country song almost. I like country music, and it's only gotten better, I got to tell you. But
that's right.
It's a running joke. You lose your job, right?
Yep.
You end your 25-year relationship. And I also lost my dog because I had to put my dog down right around that same time, all within a couple of months. So, I mean, tell me that doesn't sound like a country song to you, right? And I also had just turned 50 years old, right?
Wow.
So there were different things that were happening at the same time. But, you know, I while I was unemployed, I did a handful of things, one of which was go back to school to get my master's. I started doing some contract work, doing some workshops, and started facilitating workshops, and that was fun. And so I decided to go into business for myself. And the last client that I got, I actually ended up working with them full time for what was supposed to have been a 1 year period that then turned into 3.5 years. And I knew that role was coming to an end. And it was now February of 2019 when I didn't realize that this is what was happening. But I suffered a heart attack in February of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Why I say I know I've been cashing in some chips.
That's right.
And, you know, I often hear that women my age who suffer a heart attack, a lot of times you don't make it, you know. But I had some warning throughout the night and in the morning. And in the morning, I remember instead of calling 911, I called my sister and asked her to pick me up, to take me to the hospital. Hospital wasn't too far away. I remember running in there and just saying, you know, I think I'm having a heart attack. They bring you in right away. They rush you through. They do an EKG and they said, no, you're not having a heart attack. We're going to keep monitoring you. Frank, it wasn't even 5 minutes later. You know, they did another EKG and they're still running some blood work when all of a sudden I hear
beeping.
Code heart, room 21. And I thought, wait, that's my room. I'm in room 21. All of a sudden I see these people walking in, nurses and doctors, and they're like, you know, we need you to stay calm, but you are undergoing a heart attack and we do need to take you in for a procedure. And sure enough, we went through the whole angioplasty, and I now have a stent, and I spent 3 days in CCU, and fortunately, I've survived that, you know, and it's 2 years later and I'm doing quite well. As you can see, I'm sitting here, I'm smiling, I'm able to share this story. And again, I'm still looking for peace in some way, because these things that continue to happen, you know, I think the way that you and I connected was via this article that I wrote recently for Biz Catalyst about panic attacks.
Yes.
And panic attack that then made me recall events of the car accident that I absolutely had no recollection of. But as I've talked to more people, I'm hearing about these, you know, our cellular memory recording certain things that even if we think we don't know or we're not experiencing it, we truly are experiencing it. So therefore I must have. And I don't know how much of an impact any of these things have had on my life, but I'm certainly in search of peace. No, there's no question about it.
Exactly. What I've heard, we had a gentleman who had a heart attack on a few episodes back, and he says one of the things that occurs at post-heart attack is a panic attack that may not have anything to do with the heart attack. Now, I was a medic in the military, and I work with a number of veterans who deal with PTSD. Okay, and a trigger can occur as I found out with these veterans, several years after an event that they may not have even, that they felt they had put out of their mind. Is that what happened? Is this event came back to you?
It has to be because, you mentioned 2013, and that's really when the panic attacks started to happen. I sort of made fun of, the events that occurred as I talked about it.
Right.
Kind of about it sounding like a country song, but you go through things when those types of things are happening. Job loss, ending of a relationship that was, quarter of a century, right? And I started having panic attacks in 2013, and I never knew. I never understood. What do you mean when I've heard people mention panic attacks? What are you talking about? What do you mean you can't be in an enclosed car? What do you mean you can't sit here and have conversation? It's like, what? Not until you go through it can you understand what a person is enduring as they're going through this state of a panic attack. And I had a series of panic attacks during 2013 and even 14. And when things in my life sort of normalized a bit, I felt better. I had incidents here and there, but nothing to like what occurred that brought back this incident that I mentioned. And it was, the shower water hitting my head that made me see this dark water, and I saw myself in the car. But how can I remember that?
Right.
I was knocked out, and I had just started going through panic attacks again, right? I think a lot of us coming out of COVID, some of us have come out of COVID okay, some of us haven't come out so okay. Fortunately, I did not get sick because I made myself a prisoner of my home. I was doing some workshops at the time, and those came to a screeching halt because they were on site. And I have not, where others have either continued in their jobs, in their roles at home in a remote capacity. There were some that lost their jobs, whatever job they had, and have not worked since. And I'm one of those. Right. And so I've been home. And maybe it's all starting to get to me again now, where the panic attacks have kicked in. I had a panic attack while I was grocery shopping one day where I felt myself, I couldn't breathe and I had to pull the mask off. I've been wearing a mask for a year now. How is it bothering me now? And that was the first one. And then there were other little episodes, but this one was probably the one that really impacted and affected me the most as I stepped into the shower and all of a sudden I get this visual. I had to step out from under the water, Frank, because what I felt was I couldn't breathe. And I had to rush through this shower to get myself out of that bathtub because I just felt like I was actually going through that process that I, again, have no recollection of. And I don't want to over dramatize this, but I need to just share the emotion and the feeling so that for folks who have never experienced a panic attack or that downplay, let's categorize panic attacks into mental illness, which a lot of people unfortunately are dealing with and are not talking about. And I think we're talking about it a little bit more comfortably now, but
finally,
as individuals. But how are corporations and organizations that are hiring you still looking at these things? And
yes.
You know what? I probably will end up having to go into business for myself, finally make that decision, because I've been in transition for some time, teetering between looking for work or building my own business again, which is the direction I was going in a few years back, and sort of derailed myself. But I may not be hireable at this point, right?
Right. You all hit that age thing that they say doesn't exist, but exists. Yeah. One of the things that intrigued me when we were listening and reading your story was in this search for peace, you ran into a very good friend of both of ours, Mark O'Brien.
Oh, God, yes.
And Mark has a writing type program that he brought you into. How's that helped you?
Wow. I'm so glad you brought that up because, in the beginning of the year, I was sitting in another one of these community groups that have been formed as a result of everyone not being connected due to COVID. And we were talking about defining our voice, a word for the year. And the word that I came up for myself was voice, the word voice. And I said, you know what? I'm done being home. I'm done staying home. I need to do something. There's more I want to do. I enjoy speaking. I love doing those workshops. And as a child, I used to write all the time. And I've started to write a book or two and put them to the side and haven't continued that process. But it was a couple of months later when I see this post from Mark O'Brien that he's doing this workshop, and he's naming it Finding Your Voice. Again, I don't believe in coincidences. So this is another one of those, interconnected occurrences, if you will, right?
Right. Yes.
He opened it up to, I think it was 5 people, and whoever one of the first 5 people to join, that's it. But he actually reached out and invited me to sit in. And I thought, why not? I should do this. And oh, I got to tell you, Frank, it's been one of the best decisions I have made. We started meeting every Thursday, and there's a small group of us. There's Mark, and there, I don't know if I can mention all of their names, but I don't know, there shouldn't be any privacy in this. I think everyone that's read the articles knows exactly who's part of the writing workshop. But what a beautiful group of people. Mark himself has been amazing. And it was during session 2 of our meeting, we would write, we would come up with a prompt of some sort. We started out by looking at one of Mark's wife's drawings or one of her paintings. And we all came back and wrote about it, what we experienced, what we felt, what we thought it represented. And it was all from different directions. No two were alike. And that just really kicked things into gear. And so we had writing assignments that we would then come back as we got together, and we would read them out loud to each other and have conversations about them. And it might have been the second or third session where it was like, there's something I have to say, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not appropriate, but it's what I'm feeling and I want to share it. And I said to them, I love you all. And, we were strangers just a few weeks ago.
Correct.
Complete strangers to each other. But if there's anything that's brought peace into my life, it's that workshop. It's that workshop, not just because it's a writing workshop, but because of the people that are involved in it. And I don't know, we've been talking a lot about it lately. I mean, Dennis joined us at last week's gathering because there's some secret sauce going on here that people want the ingredients for. And we all tried to explain as best as we could what was happening. And again, we all came at it from our own perspectives, and we can meet in the same place, but it's doing different things for all of us. But there's still some commonality and a common thread here where we're all feeling the same type of emotion. And I can only hope that in all of these other online communities that are being built, that this kind of union and understanding and togetherness takes place. Because hopefully you'll join us as a guest during the, maybe the one time a month that we're going to say, yeah, let's bring
somebody in.
It'd be great to have you join us during one of those. In fact, I'll let Mark know, because he wanted to make sure that I said hello to you, because we met today. We changed our Thursdays to Wednesdays now to accommodate everybody's schedule. But what an amazing thing that we have going.
He's done something just truly amazing. Now, I understand you, with the Inner Peace coming back, you're developing a program for personal development. Tell us about that.
I because of all the different things that I've gone through, and again, I mentioned I've had a successful career. I really can't complain about the things I've done. Sometimes I downplay it and I don't even acknowledge my own achievements, but becoming a vice president at a company a couple different times, those are accomplishments that we should be proud of. Careers
yes, they are.
Gone through. And even if corporate America is as screwed up as it is, and there's so many of us trying to change it now, that maybe it will become something different. Something happened to me along the way where I lost a lot of my own self-confidence. I've gone through a lot of self-doubt. I have gone through imposter syndrome that a lot of women have talked about, and now more men are starting to admit to it and talk about it as
That's
well.
true.
And it's a real thing, and it exists. And I have sort of been paralyzed and crippled, and I think COVID only further accentuated a lot of those feelings. And I've done programs seeking purpose, seeking meaning, validating my ability to be a presenter and a speaker. I have the skills. I mean, I've done things. I have something that I keep around with me. I'll show it to you. I even did a program early last year, one of these board breaking events, and I wrote the word self-doubt, and I did my karate chop and broke it, and just to break through that. Another one which I think was a lot of fun to do, and I'm sharing these with you because these are different things that people are doing. And this was a year and a half ago. So there's this arrow, a regular arrow with a little metal piece. You're supposed to put it in by your throat and then just walk into the wall. And as you walk into the wall, it breaks. It was one piece at one time. I keep these with me as reminders that I do have confidence, that I do have, I have the ability to accomplish the things that I want to, but I'm still looking for that moment of peace because I've been paralyzed by fear of what I can list 50 different things, but mostly it's of the same things, of judgment, of failure. So, I was sitting down one day, I've done I do a lot of reading. Some of them are self-help books. Some of them become shelf-help, right? As we've heard, because then you never even get to read some of them. But some of these things have helped me. And one day while watching some motivational program, it just, somehow it came to me that, well, first of all, they were talking about fear and how, fear is false evidence appearing real. And we know the other acronyms. Some say you can either forget everything and run or face everything and rise. And it hit me that I'm never going to get to conquer fear,
Right.
But I'm able to learn to live with it. So I've named this program Embrace the Fear. And I started to scribble some notes that day in February. And the word embrace is actually an acronym for what I'm in the process of developing now as a 7-step framework to help people work through certain things. One of the things that, we have ideas, we start planning, we dream about certain things, we know there's certain action we have to take, then it stops. We don't take the action. And unless we do the work, unless we take the action, it doesn't happen. And as almost like addictions, where the individual absolutely has to be ready to get past that moment in their lives, or someone needs therapy and refuses to go out and get therapy because,
The stigma.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So until a person is ready, you really can't get through something. And I'm there. And I've started to share what I'm working on with a handful of folks so that they can walk through this framework with me. And all I'm being told at the end of it is hurry up, finish it. You've got to get this out there. There are so many people that need to hear the messages. And I don't want to share too much more. The attorney that I'm working with on trademarking this right now and copywriting said, say but so much,
Yes.
So this is getting trademarked. So
Excellent.
I'm excited about it because working on this program has helped me find peace. But it's not just this program. It's been it's a transition. And I've been talking about transition. And unfortunately, you have people in your life that some of them can deal with you going through a transition of some sort. And some of them say, I can't deal with you anymore. There's either negative Nancy, there's Debbie Downer, you're in the middle of your pity party. No, I'm going through a transition. I'm going through a process. And I'm gonna get through this on the other side because I've survived way too many things.
Yes, you have.
To not make this happen. So I'm here for a reason. And it's about to happen. It's about to happen.
We can see just in the course of our conversation here, the change in your presentation and your style as you got more and more excited about where your life is going. So ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. This has been just a fabulous conversation, and we'll hope to have Maribel back again once she gets this program a little bit further. I want to thank you for being here and sharing this amazing story as you are trying to find peace. And from the look on your face, you look like you are now finding that peace. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want more information about Maribel, you can contact me at my website, Frank Zaccari, or go through LinkedIn, and I'll make sure it gets to her. Okay. Now, you can see this show on ROKU TV or on my YouTube channel. And if you use the YouTube channel, please subscribe. Now, as I leave every show that I ever do and books that I write, we always end like this. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Maribel showed us where many of those rocks are. If you want to find where more are, get my book, Business Secrets to Walking on Water. Join me again next week. We talk about another life-altering event. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I really appreciate the time today and being here in your show. Thank you.
Wonderful.